Hey, Mike Walsh here from Straight Path Solutions. I want to take a real quick moment to give you one example of why I'm a big fan of platform as a service, or function as a service, whatever you want to call it, but the ability to sort of buy a database server, um, pay for what you need on a monthly basis, and let somebody else manage some of the things that you would normally manage. Is it right for everybody? Not at all. But it has some benefits. I'm going to talk to you about high availability and disaster recovery. So what we're looking at here is the sort of the Microsoft knowledge base article about creating and configuring an availability group. It's not the only high availability and disaster recovery solution out there. There's clustering, there's log shipping, there's many others, even still mirroring if you wanted to. But it's an example, and there's a lot here. And I do a lot of availability groups. I have no problem with availability groups. I think it's a wonderful technology. And for the clients who need to be on premise, it makes a lot of sense. Or who need to be in an infrastructure as a service in the cloud, it makes sense. It's a great solution. In fact, I have a couple Azure AGs I'm deploying as I'm speaking, or not as I'm speaking, but this week. But there's a lot of steps, right? There's prerequisite steps. So if we go to prerequisites and recommendations, we can see here, these are just some of the hot fixes that we need. There's some checklists, and we have to do some things. We have to build a Windows cluster. We have to patch our servers, make sure they're happy. So we have to install Windows, install SQL, install the prerequisites and the patches that are required, set up and configure clustering, make sure we get quorum settings right because node majority is very important in an availability group. We have to make sure we have the service accounts right and just kind of build everything right. Get our storage set up and make sure it's performant, if I can make up a word, and do a bunch of other things, and we build clustering, then we enable availability groups onto that cluster, and we deploy the availability group. Then we have to add a database. We have to sort of sync the database. So, we have to create the availability group. Here's a lot of stuff there. We have to worry about ports and listeners. We can join a secondary server. That's just the primary. We have to add a database to it, so we join a database, we add a database. Lots of things to do. If we want read-only access, we have to go through another process to make sure the read-only listener works. If we're dealing with multi-subnet failovers across the country to a different data center, we have to worry about multi-subnet failover clusters. Just a lot of stuff. Nothing bad here. It's all doable. And I do this a lot of times for clients. Let's say it's depending on all said and done, but the planning, the building, the deploying, the testing, the documenting, the knowledge transfer, and kind of hand holding to make sure things are good. Let's say that's probably a 60 to 80 hour engagement, maybe a little bit more, depending on what you're trying to do. Maybe a little bit less depending on your sophistication, but it's work. So we're done. We've built our servers, we've configured our server, we've done all that work, and we press our buttons, and we have an availability group, and it's a wonderful technology, like I said. So platform as a service. I'm in the Azure portal here, and this is just a sort of, if you don't know the Azure portal, well, watch my Azure SQL database introduction video, or watch any of the other videos out there. But believe me, I have a server here, and this server is really just a container. Again, if you want to watch the Azure SQL database guided tour video from Group Bio, you'll see what that means. But there's this sort of server called Easy Server. That's the container for the Azure SQL database, and I have a database I called So Easy is the name of the database. And I've decided that I want to have HA and DR. So right off the bat, this database is built in the East US region. You can see that right here. So that means, just so you know, I have high availability. When Microsoft built this machine for me, and by the way, I just built it right before I started this, and you can't see the timing, but it took about, I think, 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes to build tonight. So I went from having nothing to having a server and a database in about 2 minutes. Once that was done, I automatically had high availability. High availability means that I can have a failure locally. I can lose a server. I can have a problem with the storage on one of the nodes and come up in this data center. If I lose a data center, I'm not protected. So I have no disaster recovery. But by default, I have 3 copies of my database behind the scenes here. So I have 3 copies of this database I created. Microsoft's doing my check DBs for me. Microsoft's doing my backups for me, and they took care of my high availability. So right off the gate, I didn't have to build a synchronous availability group at all. But let's just say, we said, I really wish we had DR. All of our eggs are in the East US region. If we look at this little map here, we'll see all of our eggs are here. Well, I could click all these links and I could build an availability group if I had a server. I don't want to do that. I just want to click a few buttons. So watch this. One, I'm clicking configure geo-replication from the server. I'm going to decide, I want to put this in the West region. In fact, they recommend the West region, which is sort of the counterpart to the East region. So I'll go ahead and click it. Or I can click down here. Now I'm going to ask, it's going to answer some questions. I can decide if I want it to be a readable secondary right off the gate, and it will be. I have to build a container, so I'm just going to build a quick container. I'm just going to call this DR site, and we'll just create a login here. We'll just call it delete me, give it a password, packet type, and it's going to be in the West region. I'm going to click. We'll change the, I'll click select there. So that's going to be our server. We're going to keep it in the basic tier just because I'm being cheap for this demo. Going to click apply. Didn't really even need to do that, but I will. I'm going to click OK here. What's happening right now is this deployment was just submitted to Azure, or Azure, however you want to say it. I change how I say it depending on my mood. And this little pretty dialogue here is showing me that it's in the middle of building the deployment, and very soon we're going to see this is done. And if I stay here and kind of chat for a couple more seconds, I'm not going to sing you a song, but if we just stay and watch, we'll see this eventually be done. It might take a minute, maybe take 2 minutes, but that's it. When this is done, when this dialog box tells me we have our DR site, I'm done. I've configured DR. So now I have 3 copies over in the West US region of the same Azure SQL database. It's synchronized for me. I can do read-only connections to that site, and if something were to happen to the East US region and all 3 copies there, I would be protected. So that took me about 5 minutes, and it cost me a monthly fee for that server, but I'm going to pay that monthly fee anyway in my on-premise deployment. And that right there is pretty simply one of the good highlights of why I like platform as a service. Will it handle every workload? No, of course not. Will it handle every need? No, of course not. It'll handle most. I've been bringing some pretty big clients over there. Microsoft supports a lot of great clients over there. AWS and RDS for SQL Server and MySQL and Postgres, including many big technologies are there as well. Microsoft and Azure now supports Postgres and MySQL as well. So if you don't need the physical infrastructure, if you don't need to be in the server business and the DBA business, you can still be in the architecture business. You can still be in the deployment business and the planning business, but you don't have to build those servers. And boom, I can stop talking to you. Filling time. That deployment is now succeeded. We now have a DR site. So we now have our database in 2 regions, and if I wanted to, I could add another region and repeat the process. It's that easy. There's a lot of caveats, a lot of gotchas. Check out my video from the group buy session. It was a free community event, Azure SQL Databases intro. Check out Microsoft's posts. Look at Amazon's post for the AWS. Look at Google's post for what they're doing. And really consider platform as a service. It's a pretty cool technology. Thanks.